Our next speaker is also from Singapore. We've got a lot of Singapore speakers in these 2 days. His name is Tschang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's with the Singapore Management University, or SMU as they call it. He's done a lot of research on supply chains, particularly knowledge-based industries, creative industries, again, infocom, technology, and so on. And Ted has published a lot of work on these topics, and I'm going to hand over to him for his presentation.
Okay, thank you. Is this the clicker? Yes. Oh, but it's not clicking. Sorry? Oh, we removed the...
No, did you point it at this thing? You had to plug it in.
Oh, this thing has to be plugged in. Can I remove this? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Oh, this is your clicker. Oh, theirs. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Oops. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul and Kim-Ling. I'm teaching in Singapore, but I'm not exactly Singaporean, but I grew up in Singapore, so very mixed up. Thanks to Ching also for having invited me again. I didn't destroy the workshop last year. So I'm going to try to destroy it again this year. I have a lot of ideas, and I tend to put things in, and you're not going to see half the slides in your package, so I apologize. I've added new ones since then. I thought usually students can hear me anyway and talk so loudly.
The belt?
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Oh, I see. Like this. Oh, I see. Like this, maybe. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So about 15 years ago, I was in Tokyo, and I worked at the ADB and elsewhere. And I started studying the offshoring industry back then. I haven't really updated my knowledge as much. I've gone back and done studies early 2000s in India, mid-2000s, China, Philippines. And then when I got to a business school, I had to publish at the firm level. So I started to look more at design in new industries, creative industries like video games. And I'm still a bit embarrassed to say it. But then this whole area in business school started taking off the last few years, called design thinking. So I tried to look at how game design is a form of design process. And you can teach it as a way of thinking. You can teach firms how to design their businesses better through business model innovation. And some of these design thinkers are also trying to influence how policy is shaped. How do you design policies better? So I'm going to bring out some of those things today just to touch on, see if it resonates, if it captures your imagination, and see, you can talk to me later if you want to know more. So my earlier slides, a lot of it was based on last year, but because there's a lot of introduction already on global value chains, I'm just going to skim through some of it. That's the first part, the basic understanding of GVCs, as I would call them. The actors, what are the firms, the key firms, and how do they interact with one another. Sometimes they are in ecosystems, in clusters, like you saw in the video. But the industries I study, like IT-enabled industries, like services, games. As an academic, I always try to challenge conventional thinking, even within academia. And when I looked at gaming clusters, like video game clusters of studios, I didn't find the traditional clustering effect. And even when I was in a World Bank project in Manila, we studied clusters there. They kept telling me, look for the cluster of offshore industries. And I said, there's no cluster, there's no supply, sorry, they said, look for the cluster in the supply chains. And I said, there's no supply chain. Everything was IT disintermediated and sent from overseas to Manila. done there and then sent back electronically, right? The call center is that way. It's just an instantaneous connection, a phone call. So if there's any cluster effect, it's usually the local skills, maybe the companies, they're rubbing off on one another, sharing knowledge a little bit, not much. But where's the supply chain in a IT good, you know? And the same thing with video games, right? An industry in Singapore is predicated on clusters. But then when I looked at where the video game clusters were in the US, they're organic, you know? One great firm starts up, and then next thing you know, more people come to that cluster of one firm, and then they spin off, and they get new firms. And then overnight, you have what looks like a cluster, but no cluster policy created it. So this is the issue I have sometimes with some of the new industries. It's very industry-specific how things happen. So anyway, that was just an aside. I'll talk a little bit about three big dimensions that I'm trying to use to capture some of the cases I will explain. And then I'll talk about what the traditional innovation literature from the business school side talks about as types of innovation and how you're not really going to see them helping you understand some of this stuff. Either you have to connect a lot of it together or you have to introduce new concepts like business models. And the reason why we don't teach business models in business schools, I mean, I'm kind of new to it. We're launching a new course this year, a new class, a capstone class for undergrads called Business Model, Design of Business, but it's Business Model Design. And I asked my co-designer, who's a very experienced consultant from Accenture, how come we don't teach this stuff? He said, because it's cross-disciplinary. It's from the different disciplines will have to get together and agree to teach. And you know how hard it is to get academics together? They're like, you know, oil, water, and fire. They don't mix or they shouldn't mix, you know? So anyway, I'll show you what a comprehensive framework looks like and then try to apply it a little bit, right, the new thinking. So the modern GVC, the modern global value chain, going back to historically, right? We talk about multinationals outsourcing a lot. We talk about firms participating in networks. And if the networks are localized, then there's a cluster. We talk about the rise of powerful suppliers. Some suppliers or providers get more powerful than their clients because they get so big on scale, right? Like Indian software industry is an example of that. These firms are giants now. You know how big the biggest firms are now? Who's from India might know. What is the size of the biggest firms now? The biggest software outsourcing firms, like Infosys or Wipro, 100,000. You know, and that's considered a normal scale. You know, I was there interviewing a firm that had 8,500 people, and they said we're too small to compete. You know, so it always goes back to, it seems, to scale and scope. That's the terminology Alfred Chandler put on the map when studying industries, clusters, and firms. Of course, business school stuff to talk about alliances, I don't. It's kind of boring, but that's okay. It's important. So offshoring trends. You know, when I studied offshoring, the traditional offshoring was of manufactured goods, right? And that's where the skills and capabilities came into the picture as we studied how these industries emerged. Then it became about services, and the picture was still similar, right? There's still skills, but more higher-end skills like Kim Ling was talking about. But although he's talking about the IT industry based in Singapore is a bit peculiar. It's not so much offshoring. There's a little bit of offshoring back-end business processing and banks, but a lot of it is in-house back-end IT operations, running companies' IT systems. And then there's this other very high-end, which is startups, new products, right? Stuff you can sell on the global market, make a lot of money, exit $100 million, right? If that's your dream. I had a chance to participate in a panel investing in looking for creating new IT research investments in Singapore, and they're all about let's make it like Silicon Valley, and past policies were let's make it like Silicon Valley. You know, never quite became like Silicon Valley. Every country says let's make it like Silicon Valley, never like Silicon Valley, and then suddenly Singapore starts looking like Silicon Valley, but it's not because of the policies per se. It's because somehow, well, okay, maybe the policies helped, but the firms themselves started coming in, right? There were somehow there's a threshold point where things just take off. And it can still go wrong. There's a lot of steps. It's like a ladder, right, to build an industry. And policies can enable and disable at every step of the ladder. So that's another point I want to get across. I was interviewing a firm that just shot up nowhere. I was trying to write a case study on them, and I was interviewing him, I think yesterday. I lost track of time. And the guy said, oh yeah, we won the Deloitte award. We got second this year, but we only grew 900%. And I said, what? 900% is only, year-on-year growth? He said, yeah, because the winner was from China, they grew 12,000%. So these small firms shoot up like that, And then he was saying things like, we wanted to, we asked him a question, why do you put things on the cloud? Because a lot of things go into the cloud now, right? Amazon services and so on. And he said, well, it's funny, the government policy kept pushing us to host on service providers. And they kept saying, we'll give you the money to do that, but there are all these forms to fill up and things. And finally, we took a big risk with our money, didn't ask for government money, and we went to the cloud. And it turned out to be the right thing to do, because everything is on the cloud now. And now suddenly government policy is, we'll support you if you're on the cloud. But it's too late for them, it's 3 years too late. So can policy catch up to the technological advances is the question. And can they make the right assessments? When you're sitting at a desk and everything is going on out there, the best thing you can do is get out there and talk to people and find out what's going on in people's minds. Okay. So I'm not trying to criticize Singapore policy. I'm trying to say that despite the best policy making they can have, they can still only sometimes keep just abreast, catching up to what's going on in the marketplace. Skills and all that is pretty basic. You need all that. But I'm talking about the R&D investments, technology, and so on. Suppliers are very advanced now, right? As we all know from the supply story, especially IT products, right? The same firm I was interviewing, they said, we had the idea to go and make our own branded, whatever, touch screen thingy, iPad type lookalike. And we went to a supplier in China, and we were going to order 100,000 of these. And then suddenly, Android came on the market, and then all the demand got soaked up by Android. And then, of course, if you got 100,000 and Android's ordering 10 to 100 million, who goes out the window? The supplier ignores you, right? They don't return your phone calls. So all these things change on a whim for people. I'm not going to go through this. This is a standard value chain description or definition. And the fact they stretch across countries. I think Henry should have covered all this yesterday. Configurations, this is another classical value chain paper. You can get this off scholar.google. Just type in Giraffe, Humphrey, Sturgeon. But the thing is, this framework, at the time it came out, they're trying to classify types of value chains. Hierarchical just means you as the person would organize it. Everyone has to follow your orders. Very, Asian. And then modular is like, well, you just do one piece, right? And modular could be a part of a hierarchy also. Then they talked about they were trying to come up with academic theory that would explain how these things form and are governed, like who exercises power and control and coordination, and then possibly how do they evolve. Well, the thing is, everything's based on manufacturing. It's based on bicycles, it's based on IT products, and when you get into services, it's quite different now, right? So that's why I skim it and I put it in gray so you can actually read it. Central issues about control, because some of the people studying global value chains, like Giraffe, are sociologists, a little bit left-leaning. So they're worried about the developing countries and their suppliers in the past were at the mercy of developed country clients. So the clients would exercise control, move to another country, and then where are you? You're left hanging, you see? Unless you kept upgrading. So it's a continual upgrading catch-up race, competition. So it led a lot of people to study upgrading in the innovation literature. And then traditionally, there's a lot of IT enabling, especially services, right, and business process outsourcing. When it's manufacturing, it leads to supply chains as well. But now, what are the new trends? What are the technological disruptions coming in? So I'm going to identify a few possibilities, things we don't know may not happen, but if Singapore wants to keep ahead of the curve, it has to identify these possible disruptions coming down from advanced markets, participate in those, and maybe be ready for them. So traditional innovation typologies, types of innovations. Historically, we talked about product versus process, right? And in Asia, the historical story from the 1980s and 90s was copy the product, improve the process, improve the manufacturing process, right? Often as OEM, right? And then going to OBM, right? From original equipment manufacturer. But actually, yeah, original equipment manufacturer, then original brand, right? If you can get up the ladder, you have your own brand. But somewhere in the middle, there's ODM, own design. Sorry, it's own brand manufacturer and own design manufacturer, I believe. So Taiwanese invested a lot in process capability, skills, and technology, and that's why they were ahead of the game for IT product manufacturing, and then all that was offshore to China. Similar story to Singapore, except the Taiwanese firms themselves did it, and then did the offshoring and relocation to China. In Singapore, it's the foreign multinationals coming here to Singapore and then moving out. Same thing in Malaysia, right? And then in the business literature, there's this thing about product. In the product side, it's radical innovations, typically some brand new product, new to the world, based on lab research, very fundamental, versus incremental, improve it a little bit for mature technology. Modular architectural is if you rearrange the components, or if you build better components, like a better power supply, or you rearrange the components, you end up with a somewhat different product. 3-wheeled car, for instance, instead of a 4-wheeled car, right? Actually, a 3-wheeled car would probably be radical because, it's very easily unbalanced, right? So you have to have all kinds of other intelligence to make it safe. And then more recently, service innovations are coming about, but the earliest scholars who studied this started using, reapplying, business school people are lazy. They reapply, lazy. They reapply the old technological frameworks like this to this. And it doesn't always work, because what's a service? What can you think of as services? I'm a service. I'm delivering a service. What is it? Am I radical? Yeah, kind of, right? Am I architectural because I'm blending everything together, right? So we're all in services, right? Government provides services, right? Banking is a service, but does it act like government? No, right? Education, banking, shipping, logistics, they're all services, but they're all different, you see? So when you just start slapping this down, I think you need to have domain specificity. You need to have the actual knowledge of that domain and what matters as an innovation. Then you get more granularity, more detailed understanding of the innovations happening. And then there's this whole new thing called business model innovations. How much time do I have left?
I think you have about another 10 minutes.
Okay, good. No good. Okay, so I'll run through these two cases. Just the idea, to give you an idea that these industries are quite different, but they're all doing a kind of business model technological innovation thing. But it's not just technology for the sake of technology. Technology and the use of some production trend, some consumption trend. But so far the consumption trends are pretty standard because they're pretty standard things, right? So for instance, a lot of countries have a textile industry, right? And then what happens with textile industries usually over time? If the country develops, they move out. They move to the next lower cost country. And then what are you left with? Well, as a policymaker, what do? You try to save it because of the jobs, right? Upgrade the skills somewhat. If your cost of living is stable, right, you can still compete. But if you're like Singapore, you actually actively pushed out the industry because they knew that this thing was going to go away. Let's get into higher end, into manufacturing. This happened in the 70s, I think, in Singapore. And so the companies themselves have ideas too, right? They try to upgrade, but go into another line of business. Some of the most famous companies today switch lines of business, right? Nokia, what did they start out doing 100 years ago or 60, 80 years ago. Forestry products like boots, right? So all these things are very different now, right? If the company and the CEO are smart enough, they can shift. So the instincts as a policymaker, right, is think about it this way. But what if you're a company like Li and Fung? How many people know about Li and Fung? It's a kind of famous business case, right? So I had a chance to listen to one of the Li brothers, I think Victor Li or something, at another ADBI workshop, research workshop or something. And it was very impressive, you know. He said all these things, so I copied it down. Then the next day I open up the paper, it's in the paper already. So you don't need to go to ADBI workshops to learn these things, right? The businessmen usually say the same things in the newspapers because they usually have these talking points, you know. And but anyway, he was talking about the garments business, and look how many suppliers they deal with. What does Li and Fung do? They are a service supplier, but they just link everyone together and deliver a service to their clients, right? The brands and the stores who want a product there at the right time. But they have such a global network entirely linked by IT and their business knowledge of things, like where are the best things to be made. And of course, relationships are there. So they go to Korea for yarn, Taiwan for fabric, Thai for finishing. You know, and as a country, how do you climb the value chain when everything is split up everywhere? You know, the Thais are not going to be able to say, oh yeah, we do better yarn and come to us unless you invest, and then there's a risk, right? And so this firm here is mucking up everything, it's messing up everything for everyone, but it's doing really well for itself and its clients and so on. That's the nature of progress. And then he was talking about, oh, we used to source from China. And now what happens? Because the Chinese market grew so big, we go into China. We deliver finished products into China now. You see the reversal of trade? Everything is shifting, right? So what's the policy to govern a firm like this? Well, what's the policy in Hong Kong? Too bad Henry wasn't here. I'm sure he'd debate me on this. Policy in Hong Kong is no policy, right? Laissez-faire, let things go. Let the manufacturing go into China, and somehow the firms will survive and become like Li and Fung because they're really good businessmen. Okay? So the Li and Fung case, if I look at this, and I just took three dimensions which seem to make sense to me, but I'll show you later why they make a little more sense than this. The technology trends is basically logistics integration. The production side trends is this network model of a global value chain where they are doing the networking, right? The consumption side, well, kind of boring, low cost, differentiated clothing for stores, right? But of course, consumption could be who? Who's the consumer? The firm at the end of the supply chain, or the customer? Could be both, right? So as a policymaker, do you need to take care of all sides, all points of view? In the end, you have to, right? It's kind of a painful job, but that's why I'm trying to say design thinking allows you to embrace multiple points of view and get variety out on the table. You exercise creativity to help you brainstorm on all possible implications of policies, perhaps. Another example, I threw this up because I had to review a friend's paper on pharma industries in India and China. And you're not supposed to review someone else's paper for a journal, but the editor still said, go ahead, do it. I know you criticize everyone anyway. So I criticized him 3 times. He's still not very happy, it seems. He doesn't know it's me. But anyway, I found it interesting because like the software industry, where did the Indian pharma industry come from? Or the Chinese one? It came from humble beginnings. It came from skills. It came from companies building up specific functionality like testing, right? And then eventually they work themselves up. But the difference is, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, right? Pharma is a very IP-intensive market. These global pharma companies spend billions of dollars on the original IP, which are patented, right? And then because of the large market for China, the social need, right, the government adopted a somewhat protection-oriented, protecting the local consumer by allowing generics to flourish. So basically, we're going to kind of ignore the IP issues for our own domestic consumption. Well, that helped the local firms get in the market. Very similar policies to procurement. I mean, I wouldn't say similar effects, but it's a similar intent, right? It's to encourage local industries. So essentially, is copying the product, right? Almost all Asian industry has got into product markets by copying somehow, okay? But how do you copy and go beyond the copy? That's always the issue. It's not easy. because then you have to invest in the really cutting edge stuff. And so what are the 3 dimensions for this? Well, it's technology trends, right? You avoid the high cost of R&D by imitating. Then on production side, generics, you upgrade skills and capabilities, very standard story. And then consumption side, well, same thing as the Li and Feng thing, low cost market segment, right? But maybe less differentiated. Thank you. And then if you look at what are the new trends coming along, right? Some things I'm exploring with A-STAR, which is the Singapore Science and Technology Research Agency. We're looking at potential disruptions. So beyond IT enabling, we're looking at 3D printing, digitalization is ongoing, right? There are a lot more new technologies coming down. Well, it turns out some of these things are affecting, have the potential to affect production trends, so that instead of just simply offshoring from IT enabling, and instead of just servitization, is my own term, I think, where you turn everything into a service, right? Like you turn a consumption of a virtual good into a service where the business is just selling you what you need at the point you consume it. A lot of people in the US are talking about making. What's making? Making is like Lego or in the past it used to be Lego, it used to be handicrafts, woodwork and all that. But now people are actually making IT products, or they're making anything using 3D printing, if many of you have seen the stuff being made, right? It is pretty crazy. And then one of the trends I'm trying to look at is the embedding of intelligence into these products you can make in your home. Or maybe some of the products are still advanced enough that they have to be made in a store, but they're not going to be made in a factory and then shipped to a warehouse. You see? So the trend may shift again if some of these things happen. Where's the production and consumption will be co-located? Will be co-located in another intermediary? Will it be co-located in the local store? Will the local store be capitalized enough to survive this disruption if it comes along? All these are possibilities, right? They're just scenarios we're painting right now. And then customization, right? The making involves customization. And you're customizing for people who want to personalize. They want to make things really attractive to themselves. Unique. And there's all these other trends, right? Entertainment, I study these things a lot. Digital entertainment, it's still affordable. People worry about affordability. Intelligent, they want intelligence, and so on. I'm sorry, what am I? A few more minutes over. I know I'm a little. Okay. So again, if you recall these things, right? Really, what we're talking about is business model innovation. And a lot of business models are innovated using IT enabling. And then they deliver it as services or involve some service component. Because in the end, and this is one classical framework, right? You have what we typically think of as strategy, the key resources, the things you do, the things you have, the people, the capabilities to do the things you need to do, the key activities, R&D, product development, marketing, to deliver the value, to deliver the actual product that services the customer. Right, and the particular type of customer, the more you narrow in, the more you get a value for them, give value to them. And then you build a relationship with them, and then there are channels that you get to them, you attract them, right? So I had an example of AirAsia, which I don't have time to go through, but you can imagine how AirAsia would populate all these different things, right? And then what's the cost structure and the revenue streams, okay? So the very classic framework is available here. So the first 70 pages are online if you want to download that part of the book and understand it better. I was going to propose that this developed and taught using design thinking, which is a methodology coming from designers. And these are the features of design methods, right? Iterative, many cycles repeatedly. Customer focus, always focus on the customer. Although if you're, say, a manufacturing supply line, who's the customer? It's not the end user necessarily. It could be the intermediary, it could be the client at the end of the supply chain, right? The store. High variety, you ideate a lot, you allow creativity, you be flexible, not to kill ideas early on. And then you build quick prototypes, cheap, non-working prototypes, even paper, even a storyboard or a concept map is a prototype, as long as you can get feedback from people on whether it works. Get feedback from industry, does it make sense? And then group-based, okay? And then this is old public policy, and then this is new public policy. If you can actually shift to adopting more design approaches, maybe you'll be able to think better of industry when you propose policies, right? You've already thought through it in your ideation sessions, you know, what's the effect of this on that? Take 2 or 3 actors in the supply chain, take a new intermediary, right? Someone who's going to come in and disrupt the supply chain. Make sure your policies don't hurt them either while you're trying to improve these guys, you see? Because you might actually be supporting old technologies and old industry forms, and the new ones are going to come along and you want to also enable them, right? So this is where you help policies become enabling of industry and industry growth. Sorry, I crammed a lot in here. I hope it made sense. If 20% of it made sense, it's probably enough. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Ted.